If we act quickly, we can protect ourselves from the recent data leaks that's affecting millions of people in America, Canada, and the UK. But there was a lot of confusion around what exactly happened and what we can do about it in my last video. And so today I'm answering the most prevalent questions that everyone has asked around this big event. And there's three main goals for today's video. Number one, what exactly is the risk we face? What information was leaked? What bad things can happen whenever someone steals our identity? Part two is, how do I protect myself? What actions can we take in response to this in preparation for anything in the future? How do we prevent this from happening again? And finally, number three, how do we protect other people in our life? And that's probably the most interesting part, because even dead relatives can potentially have their identities fraudulently used to create accounts, to wreak havoc on your life financially and in other ways. And so we'll get into that too. For clarity, I will link all the articles I've used as sources for this video in the description. So if you're curious or you're doubtful or you want to fact check anything that I'm saying, by all means, please read these articles for yourself. I've also created a printable PDF guide and made that available to download totally for free just for your future use. And the goal with this is to show you an outline of what you can do to prevent and fight against identity theft in the future. These things are based on my research and my opinion, so take it with a grain of salt. All right, number one, let's clarify exactly what was leaked and what our risk is. You'll see tons of headlines all over the place claiming that billions of people were affected or even millions of people were affected. What we actually know is that there were 2.9 billion rows of data that were leaked. But there's been some misinformation around this because some people say it wrong. And the company that was hacked itself, National Public Data, NPD, was claiming that there was only 1.4 million people affected by this. But Troy Hunt, who is the person who runs Have I Been Pwned? He's a Microsoft regional director and generally a data nerd and someone who could actually investigate this and understand it better than the average person like me and you. He found that 134 million unique email addresses were leaked. So when NPD claims that only 1.4 million people were affected, unless each person had 100 unique email addresses, that's not true. Let's also be clear that the Social Security Administration's internal systems and data were not part of this leak. They weren't compromised. This is an unrelated thing. So don't think that the Social Security Administration itself, like the people that issue you checks, has been leaked, has been hacked, or in other ways been compromised. This is a separate private party company that was based out of Florida. And for everyone who is commenting, hey, let's sue these people. Who do we sue? What do we do? Well, there's already 8 class action lawsuits going on. If you want to investigate those and try and jump on the bandwagon, that's up to you. I'm not going to pave that road myself. But no matter how you slice it, this is a really crappy deal for all of us. Also, more specifically, they say there were 272 million unique Social Security numbers leaked in this entire set. And so we can assume that some of those people are probably deceased, but still, that's a large chunk of the American population. It's not literally every American, but it's pretty darn close. One other disconcerting fact about all this information, though, is it's not as simple as one person breaking in, stealing some information, and then trying to put it up for sale. This person who was putting it up for sale apparently claims that the database had been floating around for a while. I was not the first one to get it. And so who knows how many copies of the data were made? It's not that hard to copy 4 terabytes of data. Who knows who has those copies? It's very difficult to track down this kind of thing once it's been leaked. Now, some of you are probably thinking that you're safe, that you've been paying for some kind of service or you've had some kind of opt-out setup to where your information isn't supposed to be out there and available for people to use and abuse this way. Well, this Curbs on Security guy claims that that doesn't make us safe. That data brokers like National Public Data get their information typically by scouring federal, state, and local government records. So that can be voting registries, property filings, marriage certificates, motor vehicle records, criminal records, court documents, death certificates, professional licenses, bankruptcy filings, and more. Basically anything that the government could have access to, they scoop all that up and compile it, and then they get to sell that to people. But what Curbs claims is that these public records are carved out from every single state's consumer privacy law, including California. So it's not necessarily our fault that we've said, oh, here, take all of our data. Here, National Public Data, whoever you are, some company, take all this private stuff and we trust you with it. We didn't even do that. We just existed as members of this society, and then this data got scooped up, compiled, and held in a precarious way by this company that didn't do enough due diligence, probably, to keep all its information safe. Then it got stolen by somebody, tried to get sold by somebody else, and here we are. And since we're here, it would be nice if there was some way that we could check and see if our data was exposed. Well, apparently anybody who's a resident in the US can use one of 2 free lookup services, npdbreach.com and npdpentester.com. The problem is that if you're in the UK or a Canadian, these won't work for you. Now let's move on to part 2. What actually happens when our identity is stolen? Is this just a threat for people who have good credit? Because a lot of commenters on my last video like to say, I'd like to see them try, or maybe they could do me a favor. My credit's only $300 anyway, or I have $20 in in my account. There's nothing to steal. Well, these aren't just rich people problems or good credit people problems. These are potentially issues for all of us. The identity theft section of the USA.gov website says to look out for these warning signs of identity theft. If you're receiving bills for things you didn't buy, you might have had your identity stolen. If you're getting debt collection calls for accounts that you didn't open, that's a problem. Debt collection calls are a problem either way. If there's information on your credit report for accounts that you didn't open, that's a big indicator. If you're getting denials for loan applications that you didn't set up, or if mail stops coming to or is missing from your mailbox, that's a big issue. Just think about the potential. If someone can reroute your mail, can take over your identity, can apply for new credit, can get new accounts set up in your name, they don't care about paying that stuff off. They will just default to the moon. And think about this too, guys, especially those of you that don't have perfect credit. There are places that will approve anybody. Think about a buy here, pay here car dealership that charges 29% interest. Think about any kind of shady business that basically approves anybody no matter what, because the terms are so good on their side that they'll screw up your life and your finances, but they don't care because they're making enough money. You wouldn't do business with those places, but someone impersonating you who isn't accountable for their actions might. So this is a problem for all of us, and we have to set up some precautions. Speaking of that, let's move on to part 3, clarifying credit freezes and fraud alerts, because there's a lot of questions in my comment section about that. Is it really free? What happens after you freeze your credit? What's going on? All right, let's start with number 1. Is it really free? Yes. I'm surprised at how many marketing emails I get and how many offers I get to opt into paid for services when it comes to the 3 credit bureaus. They just want to upsell you on all kinds of stuff. Here, let us get you new insurance. Here, let us give you some kind of fraud protection. Here, pay for this, pay for that. You don't have to do that. Both a credit freeze and a fraud alert are truly free. One of the confusing differences here is the difference between a credit freeze and a credit lock. Credit bureaus want you to sign up for and pay for a credit lock. And that's where you've got to pay a monthly or an annual fee for this agreement that's between you and the credit bureau. There's different rules set up for that kind of thing than there are for a security freeze by law. So all 50 states have laws set up for a freeze. A credit lock is just between you and the bureau. Another massively common question is, if these hackers have stolen our information, even if we do a credit freeze and even if we have these things set up with the bureaus, don't they have enough information on us to then get in there and unlock that stuff? Well, with this particular breach of data, we're not totally sure. The answer to that really depends on how much information they have from you. If they're able to get into one of the credit bureaus and say, hey, I forgot my email and my username, could you reset that for me? And they've hacked into your email account and they've gotten access to that and then they reset it to their own stuff, there's a chance you're screwed. In which case, you're going to have to call them and try and really get that sorted out and prove you are who you say you are. But the hackers would have to have a lot of your information, make sure that it's right. They'd have to talk the credit bureau into doing that. And even then, you should be able to catch this one way or the other. An example that I read about on another blog claimed that someone got an email from the bureau saying that his email address on his account had been changed. He hadn't done that. That's a big red flag. You could also continue to look at your credit report and say, is there something opened here that wasn't me? Because as far as I know, my credit was frozen. How is there a new account here that I didn't set up? Also, we're going to go over some best practices towards the end of this video to help prevent that kind of thing from happening. So the long answer to if the hackers have this information, can't they unfreeze it? Potentially. Or it could be like saying, couldn't someone pick the lock on your front door and be able to get in? Yeah, they potentially could. Does that negate the value of having a lock on your front door? I would say no. I would think that if I'm a criminal, I'm taking the path of least resistance. I'm not going to fight through a credit freeze. I'm going to go to somebody else or another million people on my list here who don't have their credit frozen and go that way. And 2 more facts about credit freezes before we move on to the next subject. Number 1, placing a security freeze on your credit reports does not impact your credit score in any way. It doesn't decrease your credit worthiness. It doesn't make you unlendable. It just means that it's locked up for right now. I shouldn't be using that term lock because a credit lock is a service they try and sell you. It's frozen for right now. It cannot be thawed unless you say so. The second fact we need to clarify, it also doesn't prevent you from getting a copy of your free credit report every year from annualcreditreport.com. That's a good thing to do for your finances in general, just so you kind of know where you stand, but it's also a huge security step so you can look on there and see, have I applied for all of these different lines of credit and these accounts and everything, or are any of these fraudulent? One quick update for this part of the video about checking your credit report, what to look for, how do you know if what you found in your credit report is a problem or not? I just did this a couple days ago because I was editing this video and I thought, hey, I should check this myself. I haven't looked at my own credit report in ages. So here's what it looks like to actually do that. First, you have to pull a credit report from each of the 3 bureaus. So it's not just one credit report, one and done. Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion all have different credit reports for you. And I found out there was an address listed there that I never lived at. It wasn't even close to anywhere I'd ever lived. And so I disputed that. Then within a day, it was resolved. So they were able to straighten that thing out. I was able to nip it in the bud. But since this is free to check out, it's only wise for us to be doing this. If you haven't checked your credit report in a while or maybe ever, I highly recommend doing it as soon as you can. It's totally for free. It's not that hard to do. And this way you can verify that your details are correct and there's nothing extra there floating around that's not actually your account. Also, I apologize for my voice and the sound quality. Future Brendan has COVID, so I'll get over it in a few days and get back to normal. All right, back to the video. Now Now let's move on to part 4 of the video, which is best practices to protect yourself and the people in your life. Based on the research I've done, we've got 2 different approaches to this. Part of the things we can do help us to not be hacked and compromised in the first place. This is what we need to be doing ongoing in our life at all times. Then there's actions we should take if we think that we have been hacked, if we've been compromised, if someone has used our identity to apply for a loan or done something else, we know our information's out there, and in that case we want to shut that down. That's a separate set of actions. So first, let's do things that protect us from it happening, then we'll move on to those things if it's already happened. Number 1, we should probably be changing our logins regularly. Now, you don't have to necessarily change all your logins for every account you've ever had in your life, but the important ones like financial institutions, maybe your work email, maybe anything that really holds some weight in your life, you should be changing your login fairly regularly. If you've had the same login since 2012 for anything, it's time to change it. It's been compromised, probably. And speaking of logins, one of the most powerful things you can do is sign up for 2-factor authentication. And if you're not a data nerd, you don't know what that means, that's totally fine. What it means is they're going to contact you in 2 different ways. They're going to verify you are who you are in 2 different ways for you to log in. Now, you could do this with everything from Facebook all the way to your investment accounts. A lot of different services offer 2-factor authentication, and it's a much safer way to do things because if somebody hacks your email and your password to a service, they're in, right? If you enable 2-factor authentication, not so much. The best part about it is it doesn't take very much extra time because what generally happens is you try and log in, you put in your login information like you always would, but then to actually get into your account, they text message you a little code. So you might already be doing this with some services like your bank or whatever. If you're not, I strongly recommend you turn it on now. We had a notification about a year ago that something was happening with our bank account. Somebody was trying to get into it. It was not a good thing. I immediately looked up the number myself to call customer support for our bank. I called them, told them what happened, and they immediately recommended that we change my login and we sign up for 2-factor authentication. And since then, I've never looked back. Logging into all of our accounts nowadays is annoying enough, and I realize that this is an extra step that takes an extra minute out of your life every time you want to log in, but it's worth it to add that level of security. Then as it turns out, it's not just every year you can get a copy of your credit report, you can actually get it weekly. In October of last year, the Federal Trade Commission announced that the bureaus had permanently extended a program that lets you check your credit report once a week for free. You don't need to pay some service for this. You don't need to opt in into anything. You can actually do it yourself for free. And weekly is pretty often. I mean, once a year, we're probably not going to catch something until it's too late. But if you check this literally every week, if you made it like a weekly routine, you'd probably catch stuff really, really fast. Another best practice in life in general is to beware of common scams. There's telemarketer scams, there's social security scams, there's scams where people show up at your front door. And so in general, we need to be kind, open, generous, loving people, but we also have to be skeptical of anybody who's asking us for personal information. But in doing research for this video, I found out there are a few additional tools that are out there for us in case we want them. Nothing I'm going to talk about is sponsored. I'm just throwing out options in case you're open to it. Number 1, there's actually something called a self-lock on your social security number, and you can go to everify.gov and place a self-lock on yourself. So in any instance that somebody uses E-Verify to look up someone's social security number, if you lock yours and an employer tries to use that service, they're going to say, hey, there's a mismatch here. It says it will result in an E-Verify tentative non-confirmation. That's a new fear unlocked for me. I never thought about the possibility of someone else stealing my identity to the depth that they could actually apply for a job, get E-Verified through a government website, and come out the other end looking like me, legally in every way, potentially even getting a job with all my information. That's crazy. I'll put a link for that in the description too. And then of course, there's a variety of different credit monitoring services and data services that you can use that try and help you out. I've heard people mention LifeLock, Aura. I'm sure there's a million of them out there. I also listened to a podcast where they mentioned this service called Delete Me, where they go out and they scour the internet for your information and then they delete it for you. I've never used any of those services myself. If you want to do some research on your own, go ahead. But I just want you to be aware that there's options like that out there for you. And some obvious kind of practical things that you can do. Don't carry your social security card around with you in your wallet. If you lose it, then anybody's got it. Don't give private information to people who just call you on the phone because you have no idea who they are. If you need to call an institution, a bank, a whoever, then you need to look their number up and call them yourself because it's not worth the risk otherwise. We've got to be a little bit skeptical in today's day and age and assume the worst of a stranger, I guess. Now, what do we do if you are a victim already? If you suspect through one of those indicators I mentioned before that you've already had identity theft happen, what can you do? Well, for one thing, you can contact the Federal Trade Commission at idtheft.gov, or you can look up their number yourself. From what my records say, I've got a number here that claims it's theirs, but I would verify it yourself and make sure that you have the correct number, because that's another way that somebody could scam us, right? They could pretend to be a government agency and get our information. Fun fact, This actually just happened to us yesterday. Some people were doing a CDC scam. I'm probably going to make a separate video about that. But they were pretending to be the CDC and having a survey about COVID-19, and they were collecting personal information. And let's just say we let a little bit of information slip. So that's not great. So besides contacting the Federal Trade Commission, you can also file a report with your local police department where the identity theft took place, and then keep a copy of that record. So you've got this proof of crime. You can use that in the future if you need to for whatever legal reason. You can monitor your credit report, which is a really good option. Now we know we can do that for free every week. You could also reach out to the 3 credit bureaus and alert them of this and tell them that you think that you've been a victim already. If you haven't put a credit freeze on, you could put one on then and basically alert them to the fact that, hey, the jig is up. This is not good. There's also a spot on the website for the Office of the Inspector General where you can report any kind of fraud situation that's happened to you. And so my wife and I are going to fill this out here, this identity theft section, maybe later tonight. It says we tell them what happened, we get a recovery plan, and then we put your plan into action. So yeah, that's going to be fun. Another option if you've been a victim of identity theft is to contact the Internal Revenue Service directly. So let's say somebody has your social. They could potentially use that to file a tax return and then receive a tax refund. They could also use it to apply for a job and do other stuff. And so you can visit the IRS's Identity Theft Central section of their website and get some help to resolve those issues. Yikes. Also, if you think your social was exposed, you can contact the Social Security Administration themselves, and then the administrator can help you review your statements and figure out if it's a problem or not. Then if you do everything they recommend and they can confirm that your social is not being used by anybody, you can probably keep it. But actually, I didn't know this. If it is being used by somebody, and if they can't track that down and fix it, you can actually apply for a new social. So this is probably something that several of us are going to have to be doing in the future because this kind of leak has happened multiple times at this point and our socials are probably compromised. We'll do these other steps first. We'll try and track everything down and sort everything out, but we may also have to apply for a new one. I'm sure that'll be fun. It's like losing your wallet, but times 100, I'll bet. Now let's talk about how to protect other people in your life from identity theft or from the effects of identity theft. Now we've got kind of 2 main categories I'm going to cover today. We've got children who could still be victims of identity theft, and we've got deceased people which can still suck for you. So we'll start with kids. If someone takes your child's personal social security number, name, address, date of birth, that kind of thing, they could potentially use that stolen information to apply for government benefits like healthcare coverage, nutrition assistance. They could open a bank or a credit card account. They could apply for a loan. They could sign up for utility service. They could even rent a place to live. We do not want that to happen. That's too messy, especially when some innocent kid could have their identity stolen and then come to find out later in life, oh, by the way, you're wrecked. We don't need to set our kids up that way. The FTC website recommends that we should ask questions before we give anybody our kid's social. Why do you need it? How will you protect this number? How can you use a different identifier than that? Can I just use the last 4 digits of their social instead of giving you the whole thing? We got to be really careful to not give out the full number unless we absolutely have to. And speaking of being careful, if we have any physical documents with that kind of information on it, we shouldn't just throw it away in the trash. We should shred it or otherwise destroy the paperwork before we get rid of it. If there's anything in the house, we should keep it in something like a locked file cabinet or somewhere that's out of the way where people can't access it. And then if you're getting rid of something like a computer or a cell phone, we've got to wipe those things completely out. There's a lot of information that's just buried in these things. And so if you're not sure how to do that, I would look up some videos online for a tutorial of your particular machine or your particular phone on how to wipe all that information out, get help from somebody around you, or go back to the store where you bought it, maybe ask them. But there's a ton of potential data stored on our physical devices that could be used for nefarious purposes. So right now, there's ways that we can tell if someone is using our child's identity for bad purposes, and here's a few of those ways. Number 1, if you're denied government benefits that you thought you were going to get because someone else is already using that number, that's a problem. If somebody calls you and says your child has an overdue bill and they obviously shouldn't have that bill, we know this is a problem. If you get a letter from the IRS saying that your kid should have paid income taxes and they didn't, then somebody probably committed tax fraud with your child's social. And then also, if you're denied a student loan because your child has bad credit, well, that's a big indicator because their social is probably used to get a credit card or open a cell phone account or otherwise set up some service and then not paid the bills on time. So I initially read that and thought, okay, we'll just check their credit report like ours. I mean, I'll just look up mine every week or month or whatever and verify I'm okay, and I'll check theirs too. Well, it turns out a child under 18 typically won't have a credit report unless someone is using their information. And so you can actually contact the 3 credit bureaus and get their information at identitytheft.gov and ask them for a manual search for your kid's social security number. And if they find that there is some kind of credit activity that you didn't start up, we know there's a problem. So if any of those things has happened and you have found that there's fraudulent activity or accounts with your child's social, here's what you can do. Contact the companies where the fraud happened. Talk to their fraud department. Say somebody opened an account using your kid's information. You've got to ask them to close that account and then ask for written confirmation. You can also contact the 3 credit bureaus and say, hey, somebody opened an account using my child's information, and then tell them they need to remove any fraudulent accounts from your child's credit report. Depending depending on your kid, that could be all of the accounts. You know, if they're young enough or if they're not doing anything yet, wipe them out. And then this is a cool thing. If your kid is under 16, you can request a free credit freeze. And what this does is it stays in place until you tell the credit bureaus to remove it. So once a kid is 16 or 17, they can actually request to remove it themselves. But I imagine it's a very similar kind of credit freeze to the kind that we can all get as adults. And so that's pretty cool because that's going to put a good solid lock on things. And then also, if your child was a victim of identity theft, then make sure and report that to the Federal Trade Commission at identitytheft.gov. They'll ask you some questions about what exactly happened, what information did you give them, and hopefully they can use that to track people down and make sure that this doesn't continue to happen. And then now for potentially the weirdest part of this video, which is preventing identity theft from dead people that you've known. Who would have thought this would be a problem that we'd face in today's day and age, but it is, because if their information is still out there, which apparently a big chunk of the information that was released in this NPD breach was for deceased people, maybe a creditor doesn't know. Maybe a utility company doesn't know that person is dead. And if the information still checks out, they can still use that person's information, manipulate the system, and receive this benefit that they shouldn't. And so here's a way to put a kibosh on that. Now, granted, whenever somebody dies, it's a traumatic time. You've got a ton of stuff to handle. You have all these things to go through: physical, emotional, financial, all these other ways. And I'm going to add one more thing to the list, which is whenever somebody has died and you get a certified copy of the death certificate, you've got to send a written notice of that to the credit reporting agencies. What they're going to do is put a deceased alert on the credit reports, and that's going to make sure that nobody can continue to use their identity. And you can also request that person's credit report from the agencies and just review it to go, is there any weird activity on here? Is any accounts that this person we know didn't have? Because in that case, we can try and track those down and shut those down too. And one way to prevent this from happening is whenever you're writing an obituary or whenever you're sharing information about this person that you loved who's died, you don't necessarily have to share their birthday, their address, their parents' names, or whatever personal details that might be common in an obituary or in other kind of documentation about someone's death. That's putting that out there for the world to see. And if people want to celebrate their life and remember them well, they don't need that kind of specific information anyway, because they probably already know that stuff. You know, your friends and family already know that. They don't need to have that shared. So all you're doing is sharing that information with the rest of the world who doesn't need to know. I really feel like the IRS has missed an opportunity in the nomenclature here, because calling it deceased person identity theft is not nearly as cool as if they called it zombie identities. Just going to petition them to go ahead and change that name now, because I think it's more indicative of what's happening and it's more fun. So this recent breach that's affected so many of us has started to create and will continue to proliferate a bunch of problems in our life. But here's my guess and my prediction. This will not be the last breach of our data. I bet this continues to happen in the future. And so we've got to accept this as the way of life of protecting ourselves digitally, in the same way humans have always been aware of our need to protect ourselves physically. We've got to protect ourselves from the elements, from animals, from threatening people. That's normal. We accept that. Well, now we've got to get a digital version of that and make that our normal. Hopefully today's video helped you with that kind of framework. Hopefully the downloadable asset that's kind of an outline of this stuff can also help you do that. But I think this is our new reality. So welcome to the new world. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Thank you for watching this long. If any significant new developments pop up about this, then maybe we'll make another video. In the meantime, leave me a comment with any other questions or clarifications that you want, and check the description for links for all these articles, for all these resources. Check it out so that you don't have too many questions. You need to have these answers so you can act on it. Don't stop at leaving me a YouTube comment. Handle this. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.